Mary is a 25-year-old woman with a disability who is excited to go with the women that she lives with to get her nails done. Her mother, who's her legal guardian, however, has forbidden her to go because their family just doesn't believe in getting manicures. Susan, another woman with a disability in her 60s who lives in her own apartment and has a job, but who has a legal guardian, wants to vote, but she can't because in the state where she lives, as well as 38 other states and Washington, D.C., people convicted of felonies and people under guardianship are not allowed to vote. You may remember over the last few years the chant of Free Britney as people across the globe watched the saga of Britney Spears as she fought for agency over her own life. She requested that the court remove her father as her conservator, another word that some states use for the term legal guardian. During her testimony, Britney talked about restrictions ranging from not being able to choose her own kitchen cabinets, to not being able to choose her boyfriend, to being on forced birth control. What you may not know is that the situation with Britney Spears is not the only one. There's no accurate data about the number of people in the U.S. living under guardianship, but the National Center for State Courts estimates that there are 1.5 million people in the U.S. that are living under guardianship now, with family members or complete strangers controlling every aspect of their lives. The majority of those people are people with disabilities. Close your eyes right now and imagine your life if mom and dad were still making all of your decisions for you. Would your life look the same? I know mine wouldn't. I probably would not be divorced twice, but that's a whole other talk. But seriously, the reason I wouldn't be divorced twice is because I never would have been allowed to get married in the first place. Or picture Jim. Jim is 34 years old and lives in a group home, and he is fantastic at video games. So is one of his housemates. But his mom, who's his legal guardian, recently told the staff that he is not allowed to go into his housemate's room to play video games. No reason was given. And if we review the guardianship rules for the state where Jim lives, we're probably going to find out that the scope of guardianship does not include choosing friends. But that's not much different from Britney and not being able to choose who to date. The thing that makes Britney so unique is the fact that she was able to have her case heard. After 13 years under guardianship and at least 5 years of fighting to have her civil rights restored, Britney and her attorneys were successful at having her father removed as legal guardian. Now, guardianship is one of those things that many people do not know about until they're faced with a need, such as a parent aging, or perhaps getting age-related dementia. But most commonly, it's a family member with a disability. Typically, the conversation around guardianship begins when a child is about to enter high school and gains traction the closer the child with a disability gets to 18, regardless of the level of support that the student needs. Parents are incorrectly told that once their child turns 18, the school will no longer communicate with them unless they strip their child of their civil rights, which is what guardianship does. Under those circumstances, of course families would want to pursue guardianship. When I was 18, I am sure that my mother would have argued that I needed a guardian. She thought I was a juvenile delinquent. Looking back, she was not that far off. The problem is that in many states, people who have a guardian appointed at 18 remain under guardianship for the rest of their lives with it never being reviewed again. You may be saying to yourself, how does this happen? Well, even though guardians are appointed by a judge, many times the judge does not even meet the person with a disability, relying on a letter from a doctor or testimony from the person seeking guardianship. Now, there are some people who need the support of full guardianship to keep them healthy and safe. And none of this is to say that there are not caring and supportive guardians. There are. However, for too many people under guardianship, that is simply not the case. The good news is that for people who do not need that level of support, there are alternatives. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities recognizes that guardianship should be the last resort for people with disabilities, recommending a process known as supported decision-making. This is a process in which the person with a disability chooses the person or people who will support them in making decisions. The team, including the person with the disability, then agrees on how they're going to share those responsibilities. Guardianship rules vary from state to state. The National Resource Center on Supported Decision-Making states that in the U.S., 31 states now include some form of supported decision-making in legal statute. This is a huge improvement over just a few years ago. Additionally, some states have a formal review process for the appropriateness of guardianship every few years. Other states have formal education for judges who decide guardianship cases, and several states actually require that all less restrictive supports be tried before full guardianship is granted. Unfortunately, most states do not have that level of oversight or supports. While guardians are required to check in with the courts and show how they're supporting their ward, there's no effort to review or remove guardianship, forcing people with disabilities who are not famous and are not millionaires to try to fight guardianship in court. In the world of disability justice, we have nothing if not hope, so all is not lost. The system is changing slowly, and we, everyone within the sound of my voice, have an opportunity to help it change a little less slowly. Any one of us can now fight for the civil and human rights of people with disabilities by sharing this information and letting people know that there is an alternative. The actress Nichelle Nichols, who you may remember as Lieutenant Uhura on the original Star Trek, recently passed away in New Mexico, far from her dream home in California, where, according to news reports, she repeatedly told people that she never wanted to leave. Her son, who petitioned for guardianship, removed her from her home and moved her to a different state so that she would be closer to him. A noble thought. But then she was cut off from her friends, and her dream home was sold. If this can happen to Lieutenant Uhura, this can happen to any of us. There are two keys to changing this situation. They are education and awareness. Education is the hope for the future of people under guardianship and those who will face guardianship at some point in their lives. Education of the decision makers in the system, including judges, attorneys, school districts. Education for families and the people who will one day work with people with disabilities, and education for people with disabilities themselves so that they know about their rights and options before they're placed under guardianship. And awareness, well, that is where we come in. Awareness that this is happening, because this matters to each and every one of us. Disability is the only minority that anyone can join in any moment. Using the power of two, education and awareness, with hope and humor, we can change the system and make a difference in people's lives. Thank you.